Welcome Strategy Battle Gamers to our GBHL YouTube video. You're here with your host, GBHL Damian, and this is my tournament review of the recent the Battle of 5 Armies pre-film tournament that was held in Mansfield. As you can see, I'm on my own because my erstwhile tournament partner, Mr. Tom Harrison, didn't actually go to this event. So neither did James. So what you've actually got, which is quite unique, I think, for these tournament reviews, is that one half of the two kind of GBHL teams went to each. So unfortunately, because we then Jamie came down and I went up, we didn't really meet in the middle, apart from at the tournament. So we weren't together to do a review. So you're going to get two separate tournament reviews of single people. So two videos, great. Potentially a bit boring. Sorry if I witter on. I generally try and avoid single person videos so that you get two voices to listen to and that kind of thing. I think it makes it slightly more interesting, but hopefully I won't be too dull. I'm also very aware that you're going to have Jamie's video, which we were texting today, and he told me it's 40 minutes long, which is quite a long video for Jamie, and mine will undoubtedly be about 3 hours long, as I am the gobby one from down south, and so it'll probably be longer than his, mainly because of stuff like this where I bang on about things that aren't remotely relevant. So I'll try and stop that. So yeah, I'm aiming for about an hour, something like that. Hopefully it'll be under an hour. Hopefully you can forget that it's just me and just stick it on in the background while you're doing some painting. So yes, the tournament was at Mansfield. It was, it was right at the start of November, wasn't it? Yeah, 2nd, 3rd November, something like that I've got in my head. Am I making it up? Yeah, 2nd and 3rd November. I was up in Mansfield, held by the amazing Slayer Gaming. And I was really excited about this because I love Slayer Games tournaments. It's the 3rd one they've put on this year, and they're just great there. The venue's incredible, the staff are incredible. They do great tea, which is, you know, as we're learning, very important to me. And the guest house that we stayed at, the 281, has been lovely in the past. So I always get quite excited about Mansfield event. From a logistical point of view for me, it's also relatively easy to get to. It's only about a 2.5 hour drive from me, which is easier to do on a Friday and back on a Sunday than the kind of 4 hours when we get to Stockport and places like that. So for me, logistically, I'm a big fan of their events as well. But yeah, so very excited about it. I do think at this point, as we get to this point in the season, it's worth setting the scene for you a bit, because it kind of explains things about army choices and that sort of stuff. So going into this, there are now before this tournament there were 3 events left. This one, the Mansfield one, the Sterling event, and the league finale that James is running. And at this point, I was first in the league. Ed was behind me in 2nd, and Jamie was behind me in 3rd. And what this meant, the way the ranking stood, was that at the moment, if I'm 1 win ahead of the other 2 guys, and Ed's 4th result is better than mine. So what that essentially means is that if Ed wins another tournament, he gets up to the same amount of wins as me, both on 3 wins, but his kicker, his best next result, is better than mine, so he would go to 1st. So as things stood, if he won the tournament, he'd go to 1st in the league. So obviously what that means is for the rest of the 3 events, if nothing changes, if he doesn't win an event, and Jamie doesn't win 2 events, Jamie needs to win 2 to overtake me, I would win the league. So my primary aim for the next 3 events has to be stop Ed and Jamie winning, essentially. It's not actually about me winning, if that makes sense. Like, if I win, it's great because it kind of solidifies my position. But what's more important is that to stop Ed and Jamie getting 100 points. And so that kind of influenced my army selection. I've got a good record at Mansfield. At the last Mansfield tournament, the 1,000 point one, I won after a really tough run through, and managed to beat Ed twice in the last 2 rounds. So they've always run the scenarios in rulebook order, and that means that you end the event on recon and the high ground. And those are the 2 events I beat Ed at last time with his Velbies, which I was 99% certain he was taken to this event. So going into this, I was thinking, God, this would be great because I'm going to do that again. Like, hopefully those 2 scenarios will last again like they have been, and if I get drawn against him, I've got a pretty good shot against him. This is really good. But to change things up a bit, Slayer like to keep their events fresh and kind of, you know, change around the order so that they don't get stale, which is a great idea. they swapped the order around, which meant that high ground and recon, the best chances at him, were at the start. Which of course you might get drawn against him, but you're less likely to play your main competition because it hasn't been ranked yet. And worse for me was that the last scenario of the day was the last scenario of the tournament was to the death, which is great for Ed's Felbeasts because all he has to do is kill your leader and then kind of run off. So going into it, I was like thinking, okay, so assuming everything goes well, like fingers crossed, and there's a long way to go. If I meet Ed in the last game, we're going to be playing it to the death. So I kind of need an army that will stand a chance against Ed to the death. And I've got to be honest, there's not a lot. It was 600 points, which meant that I was 99% sure I knew what Ed's list would be. It would be Shelob, the Knight of Umbar on Felbeast, the Undying on Felbeast, and Kamal on Felbeast. So I needed some sort of army that could have a chance at that, which means he can't break me and he can't kill my leader. Now, I've always said that Saruman is too expensive to be taken at any points value lower than around 700, 750. He's there for me, maybe at 700, but definitely 750, and I wouldn't take him at lower points value because I don't think he can make his points back. But I was thinking about my other options, and essentially that leaves me with kind of your Vrasku or your Thryden to be your leader, and with 3 Felbeasts, turn 1, in they go, a couple of black darts, you know, he can chuck as much willet as he wants because the game will be over. Kill Vrasku in turn 2 if he's unlucky, and then he can just fly off and I'll never catch him. So I was like, there's no way I can win that game, essentially. So I kind of ruled that out and figured the only way I can beat him is by taking Saruman. So I had to put Saruman into a 600 point list, which is something that I'm not particularly keen on, but it was the only way I'd have a chance. The downside of that is that tailoring, it's risky when you tailor into the kind of meta in your competition, because by having Saruman in there, it gives me a better chance against Ed, but it gives me a worse chance probably against a lot of other armies because I just don't have the numbers to compete with them. So you tailor towards one person but then lose the games and then maybe don't get to that person. So that's the gamble. But I decided to go with it. As I said, it was less important to me to win the tournament than it was to beat Ed. So essentially I needed an army that would stand a chance against Ed whatever game I came up against him. So that's what influenced my army list building, which I think might be of interest to people who kind of getting into the circuit and interested to know how like the thinking works. So I ended up coming up with Saruman with 4 Berserkers and 4 Feral Uruk-hai, and Armoured Shaman with 4 Berserkers and 4 Feral Uruk-hai, and Vrasku with 8 Crossbowmen. So essentially 8 Crossbowmen, 8 Berserkers, 8 Ferals, Saruman, Armoured Shaman and Vrasku. And I had 1 point left over, so I gave one of my Crossbowmen a shield, and I was really hoping he might just shield his way to victory in some game or something. So, relatively low numbers. I had 27 models, but I kind of I did some list building, like some thinking beforehand, and if I took Thryden instead of Saruman, who was my next choice really, I think I got 6 more models. So I was thinking, actually, for the difference of 6 models, Saruman might be a good choice for that. So I thought I'd go with it. Something a bit different in my traditional Feroka build, but I thought hopefully it'll serve me well. So that's what I took. So on Friday, Sam came round, Sam Page, who's one of my normal travelling companions, as is Tom Harrison, but Tom wasn't here. Tom wasn't going. He was at his granddad's birthday party, and that was the first tournament that I went to without Tom. It felt a bit weird. It feels a bit weird, to be honest, to be here on the Palantir sofa doing a video about Tom, to be brutally honest. But yeah, it was. There was talk about that throughout the tournament, that I looked kind of sad and depressed because Tom wasn't around and all that, which of course wasn't the case. But yeah, so that was a bit bizarre going to my first tournament without Tom, and it's interesting when we've got such a great community that you notice the kind of people who aren't at each one. It's nice. It's a good thing. So yeah, Sam Page came around, and we drove up to Hemel Hempstead from Twickenham, where we are, which is where we're meeting Alistair and Alistair King and Kieran. And we got stuck in horrendous traffic on the way there. It took us about an hour and a half to get to Hemel, which is about twice as long as it should take. And we picked them up without too much hassle, and then we drove to Mansfield. And I'm happy to say we had a lovely journey up north. So we got up to Mansfield about 7:30, something like that, which was nice, which was quite early to get to your venue on a Friday night. Normally we get in there at like 10 o'clock-ish or something like that, which is always a bit tough. But yeah, getting there at 7:30 was great, and we gave Jamie a ring, and the guys have been at Slayer playing some practice games, I think. And looking around, there were 8 of us, weren't there? So I guess 4 guys came over. It must have been Sam Jeffrey, David Reed, Steve Crow, and Jamie. So the 8 of us then, we were at the 281 guest house, which is just lovely. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it. Just a really nice, friendly guest house. Good rooms, really good staff, really friendly. And they look after you when you're there. So they've got an open bar that they're happy for non-residents to drink in. So the 8 of us just sat having a chat, catching up in the bar, and then we went through to a restaurant and had a lovely meal. I don't know if you picked up on this from any of the kind of other tournament reviews, but you often at these kind of events, the food is kind of, you know, your curry or your burgers or fry-ups and stuff. It's not necessarily the nicest stuff or the healthiest stuff. But the restaurant, which we hadn't eaten in before beyond breakfast, was absolutely stunning and really, really good, really nice food. And I had a fillet steak, which I really wouldn't expect on a wargaming weekend. It was absolutely lovely. So yeah, 8 of us sat around there and had a chat, and it's always really good. You know, I know we bang on about it, but the social aspect of these things is absolutely lovely. It's really, really important. And then we went back to the bar and we sat there drinking and just chatting and catching up till about 1 in the morning, I think. And the night porter came round and was asking us when we were coming down for breakfast and that, and it was just really lovely. And then that night, I think it was that night, it was either Friday or Saturday, I can't remember. You might have seen by now the Sterling tournament preview. Me, Jamie and David went up and recorded in Jamie's master suite, which I'm sure I'll tell you about in his video. Yeah, and it was really just a cracking start to the weekend already. So, sharing a room with Sam Page, woke up bright and early on Saturday, down for breakfast. They do a really good kind of big fry-up spread, and headed over to Slayer Gaming. We were welcomed by Dan, who was running the tournament this time. Unlike it's normally Tom, but Tom had just had a little baby. Massive congratulations to him. So he was off on paternity leave. So yeah, Dan was there, and we got in, said hi to everyone. Like again, like they'd done the haul up really well. I think they'd kind of taken on feedback from their last Hobbit event, where they'd kind of been, I think they'd been almost surprised by how many people turned up. So we were playing over like a Normandy board and some other stuff, which didn't feel quite Middle-earthly. There was none of that this time. They just had, I don't know how many of us were there, about 22. So I think they had like 11 boards, just all very kind of Lord of the Ringsy. Really, really great custom boards and terrain. That was great to see. And I immediately started up my tab drinking tea, which is kind of, when you go to a Slayer gaming event, it's just pretty much on tap if you want it. So yeah, I think I had about 10 cups of tea like throughout the weekend or something. Just, you know, every time you finish one, another one comes. Which is right up my street. So the first ground was the first game was high ground, and I had, as I said earlier, I knew that I had a chance against Ed, and I had grudged him. I publicly grudged him on the Facebook page. And said, would you like to play me in the first game in that scenario where I beat you out last time? And Ed, quite sensibly, said no. I was hoping maybe his pride would get the better of him and he'd go, oh yeah, I'll have him this time. But of course, Ed is an incredibly smart person, and he knew that at that scenario I would at least have a decent shot at his army, so he declined. So then I prayed to everything that I got drawn against him in the first round, but alas, it was not to be. And I got drawn against Nick Bramwell, which made me laugh no end, because I'm not sure how much this stuff gets out there or how much people are aware of these rivalries. But Nick is certainly not he's not the kind of player who goes to tournaments trying to win and taking filthy lists. But I've played him twice. I've played him 3 times, including doubles, and I've never beaten him. And he's always beaten me with these kind of like lists that you might not expect to on paper. Like Angmar traditionally has beaten me a few times. He's an absolutely lovely guy, and so I was a bit kind of, oh god, like, you know, he's one of those Achilles heel opponents. So I was quite relieved when I turned up to see that he'd brought Thorin's company list, which of course, playing at the high ground means he's got a big disadvantage to begin with, because he's got far less numbers than me, and he had something like, I think he had Thorin, Dwalin, Dorry, Ori, Norri, and Baorn. He definitely had a big angry bear. Is that about right? 200, 300, 400, 500. Oh, and Oin, that was it. He had Oin as well. That's about 600. Yes, that's right. So he had this little list, and I thought, okay, I've got a chance against this, but there's still an awful lot of might in there. There's an awful lot of killing power in there. So I was a bit wary. But we set up, and I knew he couldn't really win the game just by sitting on the objective. He'd have to come to me. So I set up off the objective, counting on my crossbows. He set up behind some ruins to begin with. And then we had a few sort of turns where he'd kind of try and work his way around the ruins towards me whilst not giving me a lot of line of sight. Saruman on his horse already started proving his worth by nipping out and Sorcerer's Blasting a couple of times and knocking the dwarves down. He got a really lucky Sorcerer's Blast off in the first turn that did something like, it took a fate and a wound off Ori. I think it took a fate off Oin, and it maybe did a wound on someone else. It was a really, really successful blast against a hero army. And then after that I started using command, or compel, isn't it, to move Baorn out from behind the ruin in front of my crossbows. And that slowly, by doing that, kind of drained Baorn's will over a few turns. And my crossbows again got quite lucky. Like they, I think one crossbow bolt went through a ruin and took 2 fate off him in one go or something. And I quite quickly got Baorn down to 2 wounds, I think, something like that. And so I was pretty happy with how that was going. And eventually the kind of heroes reached me. Baorn hadn't got anywhere near me yet because I kept immobilising him, but the kind of your Thorin and Dorry and Dwalin all got in on me. And he got a bit unlucky with a couple of his heroes early on, where definitely Norri and Dwalin were against kind of 3 models. And so I was basically just chucking on a few guys to try and drain them a bit. And they both rolled 4 highest. And obviously my models are quite, 2 attacks, trapped. That's going to be 12 attacks at them if you've got 3 of them. And so both Norri and Dwalin had to use all of their might just to win a fight very early on. And of course, like Dwalin then, I think killed all 3 of the models he was fighting. It was horrible. But I considered that a job well done. I was really pleased with that. And that then of course means, particularly in Dwalin's case, you're not worried about heroic combats, because Dwalin can very easily charge into kind of 2 models, heroic combat into another 2 and slaughter them as well. So that was good. And then I was able to relatively easily take down Dorry and Ori. I think they went down quite quick. And then I got 3 guys on that was it, Vrasku, wasn't it? I had Vrasku and 2 other guys on Dwalin, so I trapped him. Dwalin was out of might. I heroic struck with Vrasku, so that, or did I mobilise him? Can't remember. Maybe I mobilised him actually, but I had the higher fight value anyway in the fight. Dwalin chucked his dice and got something like a 4 highest, and then I chucked 6 dice, I think it was, and got a 3 highest. Absolute #bosh. It was a disaster. Dwalin, it must have been a heroic strike, because Dwalin then killed Vrasku. He can't have been immobilised. Dwalin then smashes Vrasku up for his impudence. That's a sorry. Yeah, so that was unfortunate. But then I think the next time around, Dwalin just didn't. I kept chucking people in on him. Dwalin didn't get the 6 he needed, and Dwalin went down fairly easily. But Baorn was still posing a fairly big problem to me in that sometimes he wasn't immobilised for whatever reason, which is a bit awkward. And he got one really bad hurl off where he just chucked down my line and killed like 3 or 4 models. And Nick was kind of chewing through my models slowly. As much as I was taking the heroes down, I was having to chuck a lot of models at him to get him. And Thorin was shielding his life away. 6 attacks with a higher fight than me. He wasn't going anywhere, and he then choked a bit, and I think got a 4 highest, so he had to use 2 might, a 4 highest on 6 dice as well. And then he had to use his might to to kind of bump that up, so that kind of drained him down a bit. And then just gradually I was able to get rid of the other guys, like Norrie and Oin fell relatively quickly, and then I can't always remember how I took them down, but I think Thorin was the last to go, and I just, you know, he was shielding every time, so I didn't really have any risk fighting Thorin. So I was just putting 3 guys on him every time, forcing him to shield, moving my models onto the objective, and eventually took Batle down by immobilising him a whole bunch of times until he went. And that just left Thorin, and then I had a whole bunch of guys on the objective, and we just had a couple of rounds of combat until he didn't get that magic 6, and then I was able to kill him and take him down via, yeah, it has to be said that evened out the, I remember saying to him afterwards, that very much evened out the trying to kill Dwal in combat, because I think he definitely got 4 highest on 6 dice with Thorin, which is what finally killed him off. And yeah, so I was able to wipe out Nick, and I ended up winning that one 18-0. So good start for me on VPs as well, which were going to be the tiebreaker. And you know, kind of a relief to get a win against Nick, to be honest. But most of all, just a cracking game. Really enjoyed it as always. Nick's an absolutely lovely bloke, really fun to play against. Just very, very easy, fun, easy-going, fun first game. So cheers, Nick. Really appreciate that, mate. So yeah, then we broke for lunch, and we went round to this cob shop, which is a northern thing. It's a sandwich shop where I come from. Just around the corner, there's a really nice shop that we'd eaten at last time we were there, and got a BLT roll, really like fresh made sandwiches, which were lovely. Came back, and we were able to put a single model into the painting competition. So I put in my freshly painted bowl, because I brought down. I was really proud of him. You might have seen him on a hobby vlog, I think, hopefully. Yeah, you should have done. Yeah, he's currently entered in the One Ring painting challenge. I think he's in 3rd at the moment, so come on GBHL voters, get on there and vote for me. There's some really good stuff on there at the moment. So I put that in for that, and nothing else really happened at lunch, just catch-ups. And then we had oh yeah, that's what I remember sitting down and finding out I've been drawn against Billy Fitzmaurice at Reconnoiter. Oh god. So I never played Billy. He's a really lovely bloke. I've met him a few times now. I'm a big supporter of things like the Plantiers, and you know, he's been very vocal in his support, which is really nice, so cheers buddy. But I've never played him. The reason I said oh god is because he had a Goblin Town army and Moria, didn't he? Yeah. And we were playing Recon, so he was going to have loads more models than me. So he's going to probably be able to kind of just sweep past me, which just made me feel a bit ill, to be honest. When I saw his army, he had something like Grinner with 12 Goblin Town Goblins, the Goblin King with 12 Goblin Town Goblins, a Moria Shaman with 12 Moria or 11 Moria Goblins, and the Shadow and the Warg Marauder and the Shadow Lord. I think that was it. Maybe he had 48. That's like 36. What's that? No, he had the mini Goblin Captain as well, didn't he? He must. Yeah, I think he had 4 warbands, so he had about 50 models. And he had Grinner and the mini little Goblin Captain and the Shadow Lord. So my kind of first thought, which would be I'll be able to tear him apart with crossbows with all his low defense models, wasn't going to work. So Recon started. My tactics for Recon have changed, because I always have with my Ferraka list, I normally have quite a small number of models. I don't really try and get off the board. I just try and get onto my opponent, kill their leader, break them, and hopefully win it that way. And then if I get some models off the board, great, but kind of more stop them, because I can't really spare models to go legging off the board. So we all set up. I think I got a bit luckier with the deployment rolls over the first few turns. Some Billy stuff turned up a bit late, and but it didn't really matter, because I think this it didn't really affect his Shaman and Shadow Lord range or anything like that. So what it did mean is that by the time our lines clashed, there wasn't really any shooting. We were on his side of the table, so that was good from my tactics point of view, that we were in his half of the table fighting, which made it quite hard for him to get models off. So yeah, this huge battle line erupted basically, which tended to come down to the inevitable kind of line yourselves up, heroic move, roll off to see whether the Shadow Lord or Saruman gets to cast their spell, that sort of thing. Billy had very cleverly deployed his army in a kind of curve with the Shaman, so he's got this curve going around like that with a Shaman here, so that they're all within 6 inches of him, and the Goblin King's within 6 inches of him, yada yada yada. So everything was protected by his Fury, and I just kind of charged in and attacked him really, and tried to chop him up as best I could. I think I got lucky with the priority rolls or heroic move roll-offs. I definitely remember a few turns running where I got to put my models where I wanted, so I think that was kind of in my favour. Relatively early on, I was really pleased that I managed to trap the Goblin King with 3 Berserkers, and he's still not going to go down easily, but he was immobilised. Granted, he would have Fury and he would have his Blubber Save, but I was thinking, alright, that'll be 12 attacks against him, needing 5s to wound. It's like I could really do some damage here. And Billy pulled an absolute blinder of a move where he used Grinner to... I've never actually seen it used against me before. I've never seen it used, definitely not this successfully. But I used Grinner to use his point of might to swap with the Goblin King. So suddenly the Goblin King's then safe again behind his lines, and Grinner's fighting these 3 Berserkers. And I was just like, you know, when you just feel like you've got something, it's like, oh no, it's gone. Which is really a brilliant move, but very frustrating from a game point of view. And more frustrating was the fact that Grinner then won the damn fight against the Berserkers. So he didn't even go down. And there was a few things like that where things were like not turning against me, but I was like, this isn't, you know, I feel like my army should be able to beat this army in a fight, but he had so many numbers, which is what I'd worried about to begin with, and these kind of heroes that were really doing their business, that it was just quite tough, like, and I wasn't really getting anywhere. And we had both had Fury up, so that was kind of mitigating casualties as well. His Wild Marauder I did get lucky against because it didn't get to charge once, again because of the heroic move roll-off, so I remember managed to get on that and over the course of a few turns destroy it. But just however many I killed, he always seemed to have more goblins wrapping around. He wasn't getting towards the table edge though, so that was good. And I was also lucky that I'd managed to make a bit of a hole so I could constantly charge the Shadow Lord, so that he can cast, I think he got to cast 1 spell maybe in the game, something like that. So that was good, it kind of stopped him causing havoc with me. So yeah, this kind of rut went on, and you begin to realise that you're playing against the time at a tournament. You've obviously got a time limit, and Recon's one of those games that generally takes a lot of time, because you have this fight, and then once one force is broken, it can... No, it's a 25% one? Yeah, it's when, yeah, of course it is. It's a 25% one, so it's not a kind of when one force is broken, it can end, which means you have to go the distance with it. And of course, we're realising that we're not going to go the distance here, and that even though I feel like I'm beginning to win the field, this has happened to me so many times with this scenario, it's the risk of me doing those tactics that I told you about, or, you know, try and break them and knock off the board. Even though I felt like I was winning the field, I wasn't killing anything. No, that's nonsense. I wasn't getting off the board, so the victory conditions weren't great. And Billy actually broke me first. And suddenly I was like, well, now I'm losing, and I've got nothing near the board edge, and the game's about to end. And I managed to get, thankfully, in the last turn, would it have been the... Yeah, it was the last turn. As we found out, I had a Berserker who was 11 inches from the table edge. And I was like, so in 2 turns, he's off. So if I get him off and break Billy, I'll win 2-1. And it was then we found out, like, Dan came round and just said that the turn that we were on was the last turn. Which, you know, is fair enough, we played to the time limit of the tournament, but that then meant it was just so frustrating knowing that this guy could get off. So instead, this Berserker charged into some more goblins. And thankfully, in that last turn, I was able to break Billy. Broke his army as well, and I had a couple of Berserkers on the Goblin King that I think I chucked as many as I could on there, just on this Hail Mary shot that somehow they could win the fight and wound his leader and get a point like that. And as it turned out, I don't think they even won the fight. I think the Goblin King just smashed them up. And so that game ended going fully to time. It was absolutely draining, and it ended after 2 hours essentially of playing at 1-1, which is just, it seems so like, I remember giving the score and they were like 1-1 after all that. I'm like, yep, 1-1, because we both broke each other. So it was a draw, which I think was an absolutely fair result. I don't think I deserved to win it or anything, but you can't help thinking when you're in those situations, like, you know, if we'd, like, there's no time wasting or time delaying or anything like that, but you know, if we'd played the whole first hour of the game quicker, then I would have had that extra turn to move him off. But that's, you know, no one's fault. That's not, you know, it's just the way it goes. And sadly, sometimes in tournaments that can frustrate you a bit, I guess. You know, when you go, I just need to do that. But then equally, of course, you know, any number of things could have happened. Billy could have chucked a goblin at Saruman and wounded him. So in the next turn, so you know, the Goblin King could have charged Saruman and killed him in the next turn. Then Billy would have won. So you know, ifs and buts and all that. But yeah, I think a draw is a fair result. And you know, as we always say, far more importantly, brilliant game, really tough. Billy played it really well. So it was a good force. I think he did very well with it. I can't remember where he placed, but I think he won his first 4 games with it overall. But it's the sort of army that doesn't look hugely threatening, but is actually the synergy between the various bits and bobs in it is really good. So great to get a game against Billy for the first time, and but I got a draw, which obviously puts a dent in your kind of campaign, as it were. But the last Mansfield tournament that I won on 5 victories and a draw, and obviously there was a long way to go, but if you get 5 wins, a draw will put you above anyone else on 5 wins and a loss. So it wasn't too disheartening, to be honest. But yeah, we went into the last game, which was Lords of Batle, and I got drawn against another Goblin Town army. This time it was James Baldwin and his beautifully converted Goblin Town army. You may have seen it about in I don't know if it's actually been featured on the channel or anything, but it's been at lots of tournaments. And what he's basically done is he wanted a Goblin Town army, but he's converted loads of Goblin Town goblins into kind of Moria profiles. So he's got kind of Goblin Town Wild Marauders and Goblin Town Black Shields, which just look gorgeous. And as everyone says, it's absolute filth, but it's disguised as you know, it's so beautifully painted, no one minds. So yeah, James Baldwin had I think he had four Wild Marauders, the Goblin King, Grinner again, a little Goblin Captain, a Moria Shaman, some Black Shields, and then a whole ton of Goblin Town Goblins. So kind of a similar army, but to Billy's, but he essentially had another 3 Marauders instead of the Wraith. It was that kind of thing. We got Lords of Battle, which was quite an intimidating force, but you can't help but think, okay, so what he's basically got is a load of low defense models for me to kill. Essentially, you know, horde armies are kind of what you want to face at Lords of Battle, because then you've got lots of models to kill. And I'd worked out before going into the tournament that I think my army had 38 points to give away at Lords of Battle. If it was wiped out, it would get 38 victory points. So that meant I knew that going into it, as long as I wasn't wiped out, if I could get to 37 VPs, James couldn't win. So even if my entire army got wiped out, if I did 37 wounds on his force, I'd be alright. So I naturally again deployed quite far back. It's the one where you go along the length of the board, but I think we're playing on square board, so it didn't really matter. And he kind of, I was over, no, where are we doing? I was down here, so he put his army over here, so he'd come towards me like this and then round. And as a result of that, it took a while for my crossbows to have any effect, but Saruman really made a difference in this. He really started making his presence felt, because on a horse he could ride up quite close to him, blast a single little goblin through a load of other goblins, which with their defense 3 was quite successful, and then ride back to safety. And he did this a whole bunch of times, and obviously because of the size of James's army, he couldn't protect all of his models with fury. So Saruman was brilliant for me for the first few turns, just blasting goblins all over the place and getting me up like quite a long way before James got anywhere near me. And he eventually started, the armies eventually lined up with my stuff here and his stuff here, and a big hill in the middle that he was hiding behind. and I was sending some crossbow bolts in, some more blasts, and eventually all the Marauders and the Goblin King came over the hill and kind of smashed into me. But by that point, I'd kind of levelled the playing field a bit by, I think I'd killed about 15 or 20 goblins. I'd done a big old chunk, which kind of helps with not being outnumbered. But still, the Marauders are just, when they charge, are just unstoppable. And the combination of those, and he still had, obviously his heroes hadn't been touched with might, and he had more of them than me, so he could kind of dictate heroic moves, and I think he did a couple of combats. The Goblin King's a beast, and he just started kind of smashing into my army, to be honest. And so this battle line had broken out, and I was a big old chunk of VPs away, ahead, sorry, and we were having this big old scrap that just was going on and on and on. And eventually I was able to take down, I think I took down most of the Marauders, and I don't think I took down the Goblin King, but I was eventually able to break James. And I think maybe at the second or third time of asking, something like that, I think the game ended. And I'd won, bizarrely I'd hit, I think I got 38 VPs, which was the magic number, which meant as long as I hadn't been wiped out I would have won. And I think James got about 18, so it was quite a big win to me. But I think I had like 7 models left or something. I had very, very little left, and James still had a lot of his army. And whilst it seems like the score seems like a big win for me, it doesn't really reflect how close I think it would have been. And certainly if the game had gone on a bunch more turns, I don't know, like he could well have wiped me out. It could have happened, but thankfully that magic 1 or 2 came up, and I was able to win the last game of the day with a big chunky VP score, which was really helpful. So I was actually quite pleased, because I was, apart from the game against Billy, I'd got a big chunk of VPs, which could help me. And that was the end of day 1. So 2 wins and a draw, couldn't complain about that really. Bit of a worry for me was that Ed had won all 3 of his games, so you know, he wasn't doing his bit, he wasn't losing, that was what he was meant to be doing. But you know, as I said, I hadn't been planning to win it, so was just pretty pleased with 2 wins and a draw. So then we went out to the obligatory Mint Curry House, which is where we always go in Mansfield, which is fantastic as always. It was about, well, all of us really, there were about 20 people, 25 people. I went out for a big old curry, which is really, really lovely. Again, the power of the northern economics always amazes me. It was like £14 for kind of starters and poppadoms and naans and sides and curries and everything, like coming from London, just absolutely unheard of. So that was amazing. And I actually realised before that day I'd got drawn against James Long, who's another very nice guy that I had met at the last couple of events but hadn't played, and I ended up sitting opposite James and his lovely girlfriend, as well as like Callum and Jamie and Charles. And so the 6 of us were, that was my kind of little chat group for the evening, and just got to know James a bit more, and yeah, his girlfriend, and just lovely, just really, really nice evening, getting to know a couple of new people. Same as always at these events, you know, it's just really, really friendly. I think it was nice, I think she was kind of a little overwhelmed, you know, to be at the meal with a whole bunch of nerds, but she was chatting away and came up with some quite enterprising ways for us to improve the channel, and hopefully some of those will happen in the future. So yeah, we then all headed back, well not all of us, but a bunch of us headed back to the 281 again, where we set up camp, and about 10 of us were there, I think, something like that. Just had another lovely evening of sitting and chatting about all the nerdy things in the world, and just, you know, talking our lives away, which is just wonderful. Really, really good evening. And then I think maybe then we did the Sterling review. I can't honestly remember whether the Sterling review was Friday or Saturday night, but it finished surprisingly late, I believe. I think we ended up going to bed at about 2:30, which is nice. But no one was, it was just pleasant, you know. It just been, no one went to go to bed because everyone was just chatting and catching up and stuff. It was really, really nice. But yeah, 2:30 bed, which again probably wasn't the smartest idea in the world. So day 2, up again, down for breakfast at the 281, which was really, really nice again. Really enjoyed that. There was 8 of us staying at the 281, I think, and 2 people had gone missing. There'd been a swap around in who was there, because a bunch of the guys went out to Rock City, which if you ever go to tournament near Nottingham. It's set in stone now. Don't go to Rock City because you'll have a really messy night. But yeah, a couple of the younger guys had gone to Rock City, and as a result of that, 2 of our lot who were staying with us weren't actually at the hotel because they'd ended up somewhere. We just presumed they were still alive. But yeah, I guess 5 of us, 6 of us had breakfast and headed over to the venue. More tea, obviously, to get the day started. And I set up for my first game against James Long, and the night before I'd explained about how important the event was to me, and for the league and everything, and James had very kindly agreed to throw the game by not turning up. So imagine my horror when James turned up on time. I was like, what are you doing? But as it turned out, he turned up for the game, and he deployed his Wood Elf army, and the scenario was going to be hold ground. And I'd been thinking about it the night before, and I wasn't, in game sense, I wasn't looking forward to this matchup. I was really looking forward to getting a game against James, because he's a lovely bloke, but I knew it was going to be really hard. And the last 2 tournaments I've been to, I've lost hold ground to a Wood Elf army, to an Elf army. Wood Elf High Elf Alliance, last one with Callum. And so I was like, this isn't going to go well. And I knew what James had. He had a whole load of archers, Legolas, Thranduil and Galadriel. A whole load of Wood Elves, Legolas, Thranduil and Galadriel. And what that meant, and the problems I've had in the past with this, was that he can stand off the objective and shoot me to death. Because even though I've got really good shooting, he'll have blinding light in from Galadriel, so I can't shoot him. So that means I have to walk across the table towards him when he'll shoot me to death, and then hit him, and he'll have a spear line, so 2 attacks, at a higher fight than me with a banner. And I'll lose. And I was like, not that I can't see how I can win this, but just knowing that this is going to be really tough. James also, he hasn't been to many events, but he's a really good player. He's the Lord of Middle Earth. He won Throne of Skulls. So I knew this was not going to be easy. And yeah, so I was really hoping he'd managed to, he might mess up on deployment. Like one of his warbands, as you always do in whole ground, one of his warbands might get stranded, maybe Galadriel, so she hasn't got a lot of fighting prowess, and it splits up his army from the blinding light. But as it was, I think he had to use 1 point of might with Legolas to get everything on together. I used 1 point of might with Vrasku to get Vrasku and my Shaman's warband up together, facing each other, and then Saruman and his warband didn't turn up, I think, until turn 3, which started off really annoying me, as I'm sure you can imagine. But when I eventually did bring him, when I did get him, I then did something potentially stupid, and I knew it was a kind of all or nothing gamble, and I really didn't know how it would play out. But if you imagine this is the table, right, square here, my army was here, so you got the centre, my Uruks were here, his Wood Elves were here. Obviously the sensible thing, I got north or south, was to bring Saruman on here, but instead I brought Saruman on here. So his whole army's here, and I brought Saruman's warband on along here. And my thinking was that Saruman is on a horse and is relatively safe. I deployed him about 12 inches away from the Wood Elves, and he could blast them. And suddenly, I've got Saruman looking down the side of his army and blast him, which then gives James a real worry of, does he walk towards the middle, at which point I'll have a warband behind him blasting, or does he try and deal with Saruman, at which point he's moving away from the middle. And I took the punt and did it, and it worked out for the first few turns incredibly well for me, because what I was able to do is I used his 8 models, and I would move him first, blast, then move him back, and then line up the 8 models in a 2 wide meat shield in front of him, so he had 4 in the ways to get to Saruman. And over the course of 3 turns, James didn't have many more models than me. He had more. I think James had about 30 models, something like that. And over the course, no, he must have had more, about 35 models. Over the course of 3 turns, I think Saruman killed 15 Wood Elves with Sorcerer's Blast, which was just fantastic. He got quite lucky on the dice. I think the first one I chucked 3 at and cast it, fair enough. And then I started reducing it to 2 or 1 because I didn't want to burn through all of his will. But he was able to just blast, and I got fairly lucky, I think, with the range for the blast. I got like 4 plus 5, 6 for how far it went, which meant it just, when he lined up this lovely you know, too wide, too deep, too wide, all close together battle line. It was just kind of munching through them. So yeah, over the course of like 3 turns, I just did a huge chunk, and meanwhile my crossbows and my armoured shaman and crossbows here are kind of gradually getting towards the middle, completely untouched. You know, there's a casualty here or there from shooting. So now James in a really like kind of tough position of how I need to stop this, but also don't forget the objective. And there was one turn where he had, I remember I had Saruman and these 4 in the ways, and he missed with all his bows. Thranduil took 1 shot and got through all 4, hit Saruman, and took a fate. I don't think he wounded him, but it took a fate, and I was like, I can't believe that. And then gradually, as I was blasting away, he was trading that with just punting a few shots at me. And you know, you start off by going, he's got 3 fates, he's got 3 wounds, he's safe. And then gradually, these little fate points just started ticking away. I was like, all right. And I was like, but ultimately, I don't mind losing. I don't mind if he gets wounded. I don't mind giving away that VP, because in this scenario, Saruman is a weapon for me, blasting the Wood Elves, and the VPs will come from my models in the centre. It doesn't really matter if Saruman gets wounded, essentially. And that was going well until I lined up a perfect blast. It was really, really good, and it really came off. And I managed to get, I think it killed, I don't know, it killed like 6 Wood Elves in one go, and I was really pleased with it. But the result of it was that Saruman wasn't able to get round behind his meat shield afterwards. They just couldn't cover his movement, and I was like, alright, well fair enough, it's worth it for the risk. So it killed 6 Wood Elves, but then as a result of that, he got knocked off his horse, and I think might have taken a wound, so he went down to 2 wounds, something like that. And it was a good trade-off, I think. But then in James's turn, he had Thranduil near him, and he natured Wrath. Everything got knocked down, which then meant he could get over the Uruks that had been in front of Saruman and charge Saruman. And I think he might have heroic combated, I think. But he had Thranduil, yeah, he did a heroic combat, that was it. Thranduil and 2 Wood Elves suddenly on Saruman on the floor. Needless to say, Saruman died. And whilst, as I said, it wasn't the end of the world, I was suddenly kind of a bit like, oh, I didn't see that coming. You know, I thought I was exposing him to archery. I didn't particularly think he was about to get slaughtered in combat. So then I was slightly potentially on the back foot, and what we'd essentially got now was a face-off between my crossbowmen and berserkers led by the shaman against Legolas and Galadriel and the remaining Wood Elves. And numbers-wise, it was about 20 all. And suddenly it was a bit kind of, that's a bit close. And I know like my models, most of them are individually better than his if they're one-on-ones. But if that battle line gets in, he's got 2 attacks and the banner, not good at all. So then gradually, this second stage of the game began, where these two both converged on the central objective. And they stopped, of course, 7 inches apart. And I was in an agonising position. I didn't know what to do, because if I went forward, like in one turn, I wouldn't be able to charge him, and he'd be able to charge me back. But if I stayed off, he'd win the shooting war. He had about 7 shots, including Legolas at me. I had about 8 shots at him, but he had blinding light. And he kept immobilising. It was really frustrating. So he kept immobilising Vrasku with Galadriel, which meant I couldn't move Vrasku to the point where he could heroic move in the next turn. And the time was running out again, and we were like, and I think I was slightly ahead. I think it was like 20-18 to me. But we knew as soon as these 2 forces clashed, anything could happen. And he eventually took the punt, and I must have moved, and he charged me and tried to gang up on my guys like 2-on-1, 2-on-1, 2-on-1. And he won most of the fights. I think this is right. And he didn't kill anything. It was brilliant from my point of view. He'd win them all, but he just couldn't wound them even on 5s against the ferals. And so suddenly the lines were then exposed, and the next turn I'm guessing maybe I won a heroic move, roll off. I think he got out of might before me as well, maybe that was important. Yeah, Legolas was out of might, and so what I was doing, I was feeding Legolas a crossbowman every turn, so that just stopped him, and my models were able to kind of go around his. So rather than having this battle line with a banner behind it, he actually had one-on-ones. And suddenly, as much as his models are better than mine, because some of the spearmen can parry and they've got a higher fight value, I had the edge because they couldn't all parry and I had 2 attacks. And that began to tell. And it got to it. I definitely had a round then where I didn't wound anything either. Like I won a lot of the fights but didn't wound anything. I was like, that was meant to be the turn that I swung this. I remember it getting desperate and James wanting to charge Galadriel into a berserker and want to do she had 1 might left and he wanted to do a heroic combat and he realised he couldn't because she's unarmed. She normally needs a 6th wound and she gets -1. So she'd need the might point to wound the berserker. So if she called a heroic combat, she couldn't possibly kill him. I remember him like kind of gnashing his teeth about that. And we got to the point where again the time was running out, and Dan came round, and we, you know, quite fair enough. You have to do this sort of thing at tournaments where if it's getting close, you need to know if you're going to play the next turn. You kind of need to know, is this when you're asking a tournament organiser, is this our last turn, or will we get another turn at normal turn length? And Dan said, right, this will be the last turn. And we're like, okay. And we did a quick tot up, and I think I was 2 models ahead or 1 model ahead or something like that. And I kind of went, okay, and charged in again. And we just had this other ruck, and it was so terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying because on the table next to me, Ed had played Callum at this scenario. What was it? Whole ground. And Callum had a fairly fluffy looking dwarf army, all infantry dwarf army, and Ed obviously had his fell beasts. And Callum had won, and yeah, massive fair play to him. Like, I'm not quite sure how he came through that, but he had he'd won the 50-50s, he'd pierced his strike, and he'd beaten Ed's fell beasts, and by some way as well. And suddenly I was then thinking, because I'd felt like I was in control of our game for a while, and I was thinking, so that then means in the next game, if I win this game, because you can't help doing this at a tournament, I'm playing Callum, and if I win that, I'm then on 5 wins and 4 wins and a draw. And it was like, and Ed's had a loss. So if I win this and then manage to beat Callum, I'm in first. I didn't see that coming, So suddenly this game, my game, is like, oh my god, don't let this slip. Don't let this slip. And from this incredibly strong position I'd been in when Saruman was blasting away and had loads of models on the objective, it suddenly was completely in the balance. And we had these, we had this last turn where we fought and we sliced each other up, and I think there's some more casualties and stuff. And it was terrifying. We had quite a crowd by the end of it because we'd gone the full distance, and it ended, and we tallied it up, and thankfully I managed to win. I think it was 18-14. I came through in the end. It was so close, and we were knackered. We were absolutely knackered by it. It was a fantastic game. James said it was one of his favourite games he'd ever played, and I completely agree. It was brilliant. And the only thing was, I would have loved it if it wasn't a tournament, and there wasn't so much hanging on it, because you get that. Sometimes you don't get to, because you're on a time limit as well. You don't get to enjoy it as much because you're kind of, all right, come on, let's do this, rather than just kind of relaxing and chatting to your opponent about how great a game you're having. But it was really, really great, and I was so pleased to come through it because he played it so well, and it was a tough army. He had a really, really good force, and he used it really well. And thankfully, thanks to Saruman, again, like he'd been against James, blasting my way to victory, I managed to come through it. So we then had lunch again, and a bunch of us went off. We found a Greg's nearby and came back and had that. And going into game 5, which was domination, I was now against Callum, as predicted. Callum's on 4 wins, I'm on 3 wins and a draw, and we're playing domination to essentially go into the last game as in first. So yeah, game 5 was domination. Callum is another one that I was kind of like, I've got this. It's like with Nick, you can't really call it a rivalry because it's been so one-sided, that I think we worked out we played 5 times at various events and he's won all of them. That's a horrible head-to-head. Normally with some form of Shelob related army or Harad, and so I was quite relieved to see a kind of dwarf force facing off at me. And I have to admit, I thought this I should take. Going into it, I was like, this is good, because not only should I be able to win this, that means I break my duck against Callum and I got a chance at the tournament. And it was domination. He had dwarfs and he had Thorin leading some warriors variable, about 10 warriors variable, and Barlin and Floy leading a mix of Khazar Guard, a couple of Dwarf Warriors and some Iron Guard, that kind of thing. So a good solid force, and obviously he'd won 4 games with it, but not the sort of force that I would, with my build, would traditionally fear or worry about. You know, I thought, okay, I'll have to play well because Callum's a great player, but he was going on, you know, he had a good bit of confidence from, he'd won the last event and he had these 4 games under his belt, but I thought I should come through against this. So he set the objectives up and he kind of just charged straight towards me in turn 1. I was a bit surprised that he moved within he heroic marched within charge range of all my stuff, and so I was like, all right, well, I'll take this as an opportunity to jump on him and kind of get a number, you know, just jump on a few models, get them out of the way and get a numbers advantage. Did not work. Did not work at all. Charged him, maybe killed 1 or 2. I was like, because suddenly the blasting, which had been so good in the previous game, is relatively weak against dwarfs because all the models are getting knocked down. You're only getting 6s to wound, and so I've had this against dwarfs before. I've had this against Sam Page's dwarfs. It's all well and good having 2 attacks and fight 4 with your Ferurkas, but you can't kill them. You just can't kill the dwarfs with the defense 7, and that's what had happened. These lines just clashed, and I couldn't take down his dwarfs. I just couldn't. I kept running into him, winning fights and knocking him out, and then just not wounding him. And basically from turn 1 till for the next hour, there was just this almighty ruckus where we're fighting against each other. And there's not an awful lot of it's hard to explain. There wasn't a lot of kind of big standout moments, as memory serves. It's just an awful lot of fights. None of the heroes really kind of faced off against each other. You know, most of his heroes, I think, ran out of might on heroic moves rather than doing heroic combats, and the same with mine. And there wasn't really a lot going on. But what was gradually beginning to tell over the last few turns was that he was winning. He was getting rid of my models, and my models were falling faster than his were, and he broke me with my army all spread out, because obviously in domination you've got to spread your forces out, which then meant potentially I had courage tests. Thankfully I was able to break him too, and we went in. We realised that we had like 2 turns left to play or something, and it was looking quite grim, and all these fights have broken out, and I'd managed to kind of drain his heroes a bit, but he had more models than me and better models than me, essentially. You know, he still had, I hadn't touched Thorin, and he still had Barlin, and he had Floy, who's a pretty good troop killer, and I had nothing that could really stop them chewing through my last few models. And in the last turn, just to give you some idea of how it was, imagine there's 5 objectives. There was a Khazar Guard on one of them who wasn't going anywhere, like miles away from all my stuff. So because of bodyguard, he wasn't going to flee. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'd broken Callum by that point, so he wasn't going to fail that. In the middle, there were 3 dwarfs and 2 ferals. There was one objective over on the left that had Saruman and a dwarf near it. There was an objective down the bottom that had 2 dwarfs. 2 dwarfs on it? Yeah, 2 dwarfs. And then there was an objective over here that had 2 dwarfs on it. And in the last turn, and again on a tournament, it's never nice when these games end because of the time, because you don't, something like that, you need to take your time over your decisions. You have to, and then that can be construed as trying to run the clock down or time wasting, and it's not on like either player. But you know, you're sitting there going, okay, well, the worst thing I can do now is try and rush this decision. And then you go, right, you've got 2 minutes left, guys. I was like, well, and it's just it was like with the game with Billy, it's a very stressful end to a game, which is just, you know, part of the nature of tournaments. There's nothing you can do about that. So yeah, in that last turn, then he had these 2 dwarfs down here with 1 berserker, and he got to his courage test, and one of these dwarfs legged it. So my berserker charged him. So suddenly that objective has 1 each of our models on. The Khazard obviously stayed where he was. The one in the middle, there were 3 dwarfs and 2 berserkers, and my berserkers charged to his dwarfs. the one down here that had one dwarf guard in it, I moved 2 models onto it. And then Saruman went and grabbed the last one, and he commanded the only dwarf close enough to it away so that Callum wouldn't be able to move model in. So I got lucky down the bottom because Callum had failed a courage test. We then moved into the fight phase, and down here with the one-on-one, nothing happened. In the middle, where there were 3 dwarfs and 2 berserkers, I killed a dwarf, which meant there were now 2 berserkers and 2 ferals. So that was another one where no VPs were available. And then down here at the bottom, I can't remember if it was in combat or if it was in move phase, but I killed a dwarf there as well, I think, so that there were 2 berserkers and 1 dwarf. So as it ended, there were two objectives that were tied. Saruman had 1 objective, the Khazad had 1 objective, and in the bottom corner I had 2 orcs to his 1, so I got 1 VP for that. So it ended up, because we'd both broken each other, it ended up 5-4 to me. And I had scraped it by the tiniest of margins. I felt awful. It ended really rushed. If it had ended the turn before, I think Callum would have won it. If the game had gone on, it's hard to say because of things like courage test, if I could have tagged his heroes and stuff, but I still had Saruman, but I think the odds would have, Callum had more models than me. So I think he probably would have won it going forward as well. But thankfully, I'd kind of, maybe it evened out the game against Billy, where time had kind of stopped me winning that game, and in this one, time had got me the win. So it was a great game, really enjoyed it. Callum was lovely to play against as always, really top bloke, and just thrilled to again scrape through for the 2nd time in a row, essentially. And end my duck against him as well, so ending my duck against Nick and Callum in the same tournament, so that was pretty great. So, went into the last game of the day on 4 wins and a draw, which I think meant I was in first, didn't it? Yeah, and who should I meet in the last game of the tournament but Mr. Ed Ball, who is now on 4 wins and a loss. So there was a slight feeling of, well, you've played this well, because the army was built to have a chance against Ed at to the death, and I'd managed to reach Ed at to the death in the last game of the ball. The last game of the tournament, to decide the tournament. And what was basically running on this was that if I won the game, I would win the tournament. And if Ed won the game, he could win the tournament. But it was more likely J. Clare was playing Callum on game 2, and whoever won that game would be above Ed in the final standings. So essentially, if those 2 drew their game, Ed would win the tournament. So I went into it thinking, okay, so you can either... Ed's kind of unlikely to win the tournament in a way, because those 2 are unlikely to draw, but it's to the death, so you can draw. So we went into it, we had a good laugh about it, and Ed admitted that I kind of said, there's a hell of a lot riding on this, and he hadn't actually thought about the bigger consequences for the league, essentially, that if I won this game, that kind of wrapped up the league. Not quite, but it would put me in a very strong position. And so we had a big hug, and we had a handshake, and had a kind of, see you in a couple of hours. But as it turned out, as the last few games against Ed have been, it was a cracking game. It was a really enjoyable game. So it's to the death. He had his fell beast and Shelob as predicted. He charged him. He split them up early on. He left the Undying, who was his leader, obviously, and the Knight of Umbar back away from each other, so his kind of leader's safe. And then he charged the other 2 in. And I did my normal things against Fellbeast, like chucking about 4 of Saruman's Will in the first turn at a Sorcerer's Blast, because he's going to get sap-wheeled anyway. But this time, unlike our last game, there was no Dwimmerleg to blast off with no might. So when I blasted Kamal and got my 6, I think Ed he used 4 Will to resist, and he got the 6, so he resisted it. Shelob was incredibly violent for the first couple of turns. It was horrible. Shelob's the spider that Ed will normally take, I normally see as a bit of a target, because he's only got 1 attack if you charge it, only 2 if you do. And I managed to win, over the course of a few turns, I managed to win 2 combats. So I think we worked out I had something like 20 dice to wound her after trapping her, and I didn't do a single wound. you know, needing 6s and re-rolling some of the ones for fainting ferals, and I didn't do a single wound on her, which was a little frustrating. Similarly, I managed to, Camille had done a bit of damage, and I managed to trap him, and I had 10 dice, I think, maybe 10 dice, possibly 12 dice. Yeah, it must be, if he's trapped I had 12 dice, I guess. 12 dice, and oh, unless Vascu was immobilised or something. I want to say it was 10 dice. Needing 5s, I wanted to wound the beast to get him off, get him dismounted. Needing 5s to wound, re-rolling some 1s, and I got 2, and the beast survived. Sad face. Which then meant that the next turn there was still a very angry fell beast in the midst of me, and feasibly, again, if I'd have killed that fell beast, I'm then in a much better position. So I managed to win the next roll off, I think, or yeah, I must have won that one, and jump on Camille again, and then I decided to Sorcerous Blast him. I was thinking about who to blast, and I realised that he was my best target. He was because he was out of will. That was it. He was out of might. So whereas the Knight of Umbar still had 3 might, if I blasted him, he was obviously going to resist it. If I blasted Camille, he wouldn't have much chance of doing it. And Ed, in the way he does, he's a very good player. He had 3 will left with Camille, and I was like, "What are you going to do? I've blasted him now." And Ed chucked all 3 will at it to resist it. I think he resisted it, but then promptly removed Camille because he'd run out of will, and it made me do this. Didn't really understand that, and then Ed in his knowing way went, "You'll see." I was like, "Oh God, that doesn't sound promising." And in that turn, I was doing my normal thing against Ed, where I try and protect Saruman with concentric rings. If you've got 2 rings, it essentially means he can't charge you heroic combat and then charge him. But the reality was, at this points level, I didn't have enough models, and there was one bit where I just couldn't quite do it. And then Ed just did a very, very, very clever move where he, let me get this right, he had the Undying against one guy fighting, and he charged the Knight of Umbar in. On the way in, he commanded the one guy in front of Camille, in front of Saruman, sorry, out of the way to make the gap. Then he charged the other guy fighting the Undying. He then called a heroic combat with the Knight of Umbar, which allowed him to kill that guy and move him into the gap that he had created by command. And it's a very, very clever play. He does that kind of thing a lot, where he'll command one model out and then use the heroic combat to take advantage of it. He'll often command a model towards you if he's out of charge range, which then allows him to charge and stuff. It's a very, very good player. He knows exactly what he's doing. And he was on Saruman. So Saruman, he didn't need to heroic strike because he was fighting the Knight of Umbar, so he'd get the same fight value anyway. Yeah, that was it. Or did he? Maybe he chose not to because he thought, yeah, I think because Knight of Umbar takes your base fight value, doesn't he? But if I struck, I'd only have 1 dice, whereas he'd have 3. So I decided to keep the might to try and win the fight. As it turned out, I needed them. He chucked his 3 dice at me and got a 6. I chucked my 1 dice and got a 4. Obviously I used my 2 might for the 50-50 roll off. Alas, Ed won the 50-50 roll off, and 6 rending dice later, Saruman was a dead Saruman. My leader was down. And whilst my leader is a big deal into the death, what was more of a big deal was my 2 might were gone for heroic moves, and my spellcaster was gone, and this was not a good thing. Incidentally, he ended up doing that. The point of him resisting with Camille was that he realised that at that point that ring wraith was really, really weak, and his original plan had been to essentially get rid of him and then fly the Knight of Umbar into that gap, because of course it would create a 60mm gap and charge the others, which is a very clever move, but that was his plan. But he didn't do it because he saw Saruman and smashed him up instead. So yeah, so he killed Saruman, and then I wouldn't say it was over, but it looked a bit bleak. He still had the 2 fell beasts and shield up. The one thing to his credit, I'll say, he was obviously then 3-0 up, and he could have just flown away, and he didn't. He stayed there and he smashed me up some more. So you know, he made it a game, which was I say a game, it was a bit one-sided. He made the last few turns like entertaining rather than just going, you know, backing off. And I think he, you know, wanted to, you know, go for the all-out 8-0, and charged into all my other stuff. And I arguably had a bit of a shot against him. You know, there was a couple of chances where if I win, I'd get the Undying off his Felbeast. Yeah, yada yada yada, maybe. But then over the next couple of turns, he broke me. That then means I had quite a lot of crossbowmen. They started legging it because they're only courage 2 with the ring raise around. I was very, very quickly broken. Even after he's charged me, I don't have a chance to charge him because all my models are legging it. And the game ended, it's a 25% one, so the game ended with me with 3 models left and a severe smashing. So order had been restored slightly in our head-to-head, where I've had a really good run against Ed over the last 4 games. I've won the last 4, and he smashed me, and he smashed me good. But it was a really, really, really fun game. We always talk about the 50-50s in the games against Ed, and it really comes down to it. And I think it's too simple to say that you win or lose the game on 50-50s. That's not right, and it's too dismissive of Ed. It doesn't give him a credit as a player. But essentially what happens when you play the Felbeast, if you win all the 50-50 roll-offs, you know, the heroic move roll-offs, you stop his Felbeast charging, you stop his ring race casting, you've got a chance to win. If you lose the 50-50 roll-offs, Ed doesn't win. But if you lose them, that gives Ed the chance to do very, very clever things and beat you. So it's not a simple, you know, if someone else had that game, if someone else had that army and you lost the 50-50s, they wouldn't win necessarily. But it's moves like that he did against me where, you know, the foresight to command a model out, then charge another model knowing that your heroic combat into the gap. Things like that. He's a very, very good player. It was a scenario that he was always very likely to win, in the same way that last time we played, it was a scenario I was very likely to win. It's just the nature of the beast. Nature of the Felbeast. And he won, and he deserved to win. And so yes, that put the kibosh right on my tournament, dropped me down, and we went and we had a drink afterwards, rather than staring at Jay and Callum's game and freaking them right out. And that was really good. It was really, really fun game, really enjoyed it. Good to get another one against the Felbeast. You win some, you lose some. As it turned out, Callum, with his all-infantry dwarf army, managed to beat Jay Clare's Lake Town army. Jay's Lake Town army, it's always done so well. It's like, it's always on the cusp. It's always fighting for the tournament. It hasn't managed to like win an event. I'm sure it will soon, because it's a really tough force. But it always seems to win. It gets like kind of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, those kind of like places with it. But Callum's dwarf army managed to come through against it, winning, which then meant that Callum was on 5 wins, the same as Ed, but Callum had more VPs. So Callum Edens won the tournament. 2nd tournament in a row. Outstanding work from Callum. And with all infantry dwarfs, which had never been happened. If you watch Never Been Happened, if only that was a real sentence. If you watch any of the Speak Friendly questions, you'll see that you know, there's often been talk about this, about has a dwarf army ever won, and as far as we know, no. All infantry dwarfs have not won, and he won that tournament with not even what you particularly call a filthy dwarf list, but just Thorin, Balin, old school Batle, Floy, and a bunch of dwarfs won the tournament. So massive congrats to Callum, richly deserved, and a huge thank you from me for for not letting Ed win the tournament. So my thing that was, you know, I didn't go to it to win. I went to it in the hope that Ed didn't win, and that came off. I kind of went. I remember this in the car home. I was like, yeah, well, it worked. My plan was to go to the tournament and stop Ed winning, and it worked. And someone went, well, it didn't work, did it? Because you lost to him. I was like, oh yeah. I didn't really have a lot to do with it, but yeah. So that was that, and I was very pleased to get 3rd place. I was thoroughly chuffed with that. So I got a lovely certificate. It's around here somewhere. Ta-da! 3rd place certificate, which I was very, very pleased with, and also got £10 Element Games credit. Ooh, Element Games? No, God no. Slayer Gaming credit, which I was thoroughly chuffed with. So yeah, that was that. I also used that, and I had a bunch of other store credits saved up, and I'd ordered in some toys. So I got myself the Hobbits of the Shire set, and then I got 3 packs of Hobbit archers. Ooh. And 3 packs of Hobbit militia. Ooh. Oh, I really wanted, they're not for a tournament or anything, but they're for scouring the Shire scenarios, and I really wanted to get them before those metal models go out of production. So I was pleased with that, and got a big old discount on it from Slayer as always, which was really, really good. So yes, that was great. Obviously what that essentially means, Ed got 2nd place, well done mate. And essentially what that meant was nothing changed on the league. It was a tournament where the status quo remained exactly the same. So that was quite a big deal. For me, you know, I managed to scrape through, and Ed hadn't won another event. So, and Jamie, as you'll hear in his other review, he obviously also didn't win it. So we are left with 2 events. And I'm sure there's going to be reviews of these because they're so important. But to kind of set this up as to what's left, Stirling and the league finale at Stockport. If Jamie wins Stirling, then all 3 of us can win the league. Whichever of me, Ed or Jamie wins the league finale will win the league. If none of us win the league, if none of us win that event, then I win the league. If I win Stirling, I win the league. If Ed wins Stirling, he goes into 1st, and then I would need to win Stockport to win. So potentially at the next event, it can be decided if I win it. But yeah, we'll see about that in the next tournament review. It was an awesome weekend. I also got 4 sheriffs off Sam Jeffrey. Thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate that. He knew I was after a few to lead my hobbits, and he wanted me to make a. He was very generously going to me and said the payment is to make a video about how you base your models. So I'm planning on doing that over the next week at some point. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Amazing weekend as always. Love a Slayer gaming tournament. Dan and Rosie and the rest of the team did a brilliant job of organising everything. Really enjoyed it. Not a bad word to say about anything. Love the 281 as always. Great guest house. Great people throughout the weekend. Really good to see everyone. And just loved it. Awesome weekend. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I have failed you miserably. I think we're looking at, where are we? We're looking at, oh my god, it's like an hour and a quarter, sorry. I'm the gobby one from down south. Let's all be honest, we never expected this to be under an hour. I hope you've enjoyed this and got some painting done, and I will see you very soon for my review of the Stirling tournament. As ever, don't forget to comment, like, share and subscribe, support your Hobbit hobby, and follow us on Twitter, and happy strategy battle gaming.